With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Welcome, everyone, to American Girls. This is the podcast where we're reliving the American Girls series book by book, except here on Patreon, where we're doing sometimes whatever we want, but on this episode, something you want, and, which lives in the world of our show. So today we are gathered to discuss truly an event, I'll call it. It is a book, technically. It's something that has happened to us. It's called Johnny Tremain. I'm Mary.
I'm Allison, the silversmith.
Silversmith, wow. I'm Dove or Scylla or Paul Revere.
Hey, if you don't remember anything about this book that was written during World War II, that's fine because we don't either.
We messaged each other and we're like, I have no memory of anything that occurred in this book. It's yet another moment on this show where I'm like, do I have Alzheimer's? Real talk. Have I forgotten everything?
There's no way that we have read this book because there are images in this book that were borderline adult content that I know would have been seared into my memory. We have come to the conclusion that we have both collapsed. The plot of this book with my brother Sam is dead.
Yes, which I will say in terms of illustrations, that cover image from My Brother Sam is Dead is seared into my mind. And though I did not grow up to be actually interested in that, like I remember being like, whoa, that guy's hot. Whoever that man is.
I want to tell you, my cover is the Jonathan Taylor Thomas version of Johnny Tremain.
Yes, mine too.
I have the hottie with the layered hair. If you like Disney Channel original movies in the early aughts, this man is ripped straight from that. He could have been on an episode of So Weird. This is a classic award winner by Esther Forbes. It dates back to the 1940s. There are two wars going on in this book, and somehow I found neither interesting.
There's a lot going on in this book. There's a lot that's happening. Not a lot of it makes any sense. There are plot lines introduced left, right, and center that frankly never get resolved. No. I feel like she's at war with herself. Like she's teasing us. She's teasing the characters. Before we jump into the book, I do need to kind of throw out the content that is packaged around the book, which is that we are treated to an introduction by a man named, in my edition, Gary D. Schmidt, who I had never heard of. Did you have that? You have that edition too, right?
I also have Gare's version.
Gare is, he's a man, a mystery, and he kind of comes out front and he's like, listen, I need to introduce you to this book and how it touched me and like why this matters. And, upon a Google, I learned he wrote a book called Wednesday Wars, for which he won the Newbery Prize in 2008, as she did back in 1944. And so, but one of the things that he says is that this book is, and this is a phrase you'll hear approximately 500 times in the book itself, is about the moral of the story is that, quote, that a man can stand up.
Yes.
Which sounds like the beginning of like a Fat Joe song where you're like, what is this about? Like, he also refers to James Otis Jr. as quote, clearly a lunatic, which sets you up for what's coming in this book, which is playing fast and loose with disability and mental health. But he kind of does this thing where he's like, listen, now, again, I've read this book. I had no memory of it. So I'm like, wow, this is weird. Why is he calling a historical figure a lunatic? This is weird. And then he's like, wait a second. Before you judge me, this is all implicit. I'm reading into this. He's like, listen, before you judge me, and by extension, Esther, would it change your mind if you knew that she was dyslexic? And it's like, what?
Here's what I need to say about this book. If you don't remember anything at the crux of it, I'm pulling this from the Newbery Medal winner website. This is the story of a tragically injured young silversmith who becomes involved in the American Revolution. It is inspiring, exciting, and sad. It's sad. I think what's fascinating about this book from a 2022 perspective is the arc, as you say, and as Gare leads us to, is that it's about a young person who needs to learn how to stand up. And I think what I love and find almost comical about this read of US history is you would not believe that this white man had to protect his own interests above everyone else's.
It's crazy.
You would not believe that this had to happen. I recently found this meme in my phone from early in the pandemic, and it was quote, real Americans don't protest injustice. Real Americans, in quotes, protest things like I can't get a haircut. That was something I kept thinking about with this book, because I just kept being reminded of the audacity of some of the actions around the American Revolution, and the way that the shock of this book is that white men will go to any lengths and any violence to protect themselves. She's like, you wouldn't believe it.
She's like, guys, it's crazy. What's crazy is that she actually mirrors their issues, as you're saying, their blind spots. So for example, some call the founders, frequently use the metaphor of slavery to describe what they viewed to be their relationship to the British crown. We are slaves, their words, not mine. And Esther takes that and in a very uncomplicated way puts that in this book. And she's like, by the way, I also won't be including Black people or really women as in positions of power in the story of the American Revolution. And you mentioned our friend, My Brother Sam is Dead, that classic, which came out in the 70s. That man who wrote the book, whose name is Christopher Collier, he hates this book, and he wrote a scathing critique in the 70s, and he was like, listen, now Allison, I don't remember the plot of that book either, because I just looked at the Wikipedia page a while ago and I was like, whoa, don't remember any of this. But long story short, My Brother Sam is Dead is basically a very complicated story about how it's not a binary of patriot versus loyalist. It's more complicated, it's tearing families apart, whatever. And he was like, this woman, this is jingoist language, she's a psycho patriot, this much, stop. Okay, but what we learned in the author bio in the edition of this book is she started writing this book the day after Pearl Harbor. So our friend Gare is not wrong, because this lady is high on her own supply. She's like, listen, we are at war. I must use the story of America's fight for independence to try to get other men to stand up, if you know what I'm saying. She's her own war office. And I just kept thinking about that Frank Capra series, Why We Fight, that actually licensed propaganda from World War II. Go on YouTube, it will blow your mind. And it's she's kind of doing the same thing, but with YA books.
Yeah, so she publishes very, very close to this book, her study, Paul Revere and the World He Lived In. That's from 1942. That's really kind of her breakthrough moment, because that's what she wins the Pulitzer Prize for. I feel like she had a lot of material that got left on the cutting room floor because it was considered too purple. And so that is directly what gets rolled into this book. I just want to share with you some key passages, because I did start reading that book and found myself actually enjoying it a lot. So from her Revere book, one of the very first pages, she has this beautiful sentence, which is, already Boston was something more than a geographic fact. And she talks about kind of Boston as a place and as a character. And you can just see kind of where Johnny is starting to take form. We're learning about him being a silversmith. This is us seeing her in the workshop of the mind. Boston boys wore leather aprons and mostly leather breeches cut so full that such as followed sedentary trades could wear them turned about, hindside, and not go through the seat too fast. They worked hours that would supposedly kill a modern boy and had often much energy left over. They lied, seduced daughters, fell through the ice and drowned. They left careless fires and burned down bake shops, or overheated tar in the caboose of a ship and burned the ship. They stole great wigs and silver spoons. They ran away and were whipped publicly and privately. I feel like she's a little bit turned on by this, if I'm being honest.
I did have to reach out to you and say, I really think what's going on here is that Esther...
Is that too far of me?
No, I think I'm going to take this farther. I think this is a woman who's in love with a man named Paul. Allison, I speak of Paul Revere. I think this woman, and I own that biography, which I totally don't remember buying, but I think I got it at the Book Barn. I remember reading that book and being like, she's in so deep with Paul. Like, she's like, no one understands. Like, if you want to understand the world in the colonial period, you start with Paul, you end with Paul, it's all there. And I think you're right that there was a real life event in which a young boy passes along information to Paul Revere about British intentions to like remove munitions, I think in New Hampshire in 1774. So of course he leaves and notifies them and they move the munitions in advance. So like, okay, you can kind of imagine she's like, okay, I'm setting that aside. I'm keeping this detail back of mind because maybe I roll this out as like a supplemental product. And then Pearl Harbor happens and she's like, got to teach these boys and girls about patriotism. Time is now. Time is money. Got to do it. But what's interesting is in the life of her career before this, she's a person who's from Massachusetts. She's the first woman elected as a member of the American Antiquarian Society. Sidebar, her notes for an unfinished novel on the witch trials are in that archive. And like, I will be going to read those because I have a lot of questions. Anyway, so then she moves to Madison, Wisconsin. She comes back, gets married, she works in publishing, gets married, gets divorced, moves back to Massachusetts, lives with her mom, writes all of these books. She writes her first book, Mirror of Witches, about the witch trials. So she's trod that territory. I feel as though she took on a puritanical view of the world and about cosmology specifically, like what causes events and where God is in that causation, that, you know, pride goeth before the fall, so to speak. And we'll get into the plot of this book. So it's kind of like her previous work is coming out here sideways, like the Paul bio is really informing this, but also like the morality of the Puritans is really informing like how she's imagining a plot and what makes sense.
So I read an account of her life from someone who knew her within the context of the American Antiquarian Society. And this person writes, I shall remember her most vividly as I saw her on one of her last visits to the society. There she was, perched high on a stepladder in the reading room, peering through thick glasses at the portrait of Increase Mather. This is like scary.
I'm like, my eyes are so wide. My God.
Back on the floor, she turned to me and said, I wanted to know the color of his eyes, Stephen. And darn it, she'll say, darn it, I can't be sure. And I think this is like something that I'm both drawn to about her as a person and as an author is like, she's entering in these very real and very intense relationships with the worlds of these characters in a way that I really admire. And yet I'm going to be totally honest with you. Like, I retained almost nothing from this book on what was either my first or second reading. I try to read these books enough in advance that I will have really good recall, but far enough where I can think about them for a while, right? Like, what do I want to say with you? What conversations do I want to have with listeners? I read this book and within 5 minutes, I was like, wait, what was happening with the paternity case? How exactly did he hurt his hand? Why did we suddenly go into an hour by hour play by play with Lexington and Concord? Like, how did we get there? I'm never going to know.
We will never untangle this puzzle. And in a way, it's like, I kind of had a similar issue, which is that when I read, my memory of reading her Paul Revere book is that it's actually very strong on narrative. She's not just throwing facts at you. She weaves a really beautiful portrait of what Boston was like in that period. And obviously Paul Revere of it all. And, you know, is she bordering on what Jill Lepore writes about as like historians who love too much? Yeah. I mean, that ship sailed a long time ago. But I think her challenge with this was actually to engage fiction, to invent a story where there was none. And my critique of this is mainly that she introduces plot points. This is like 4 different books in one book. And as she was writing, she was like, meh, like we started the story, we might as well just get into it. So we meet Johnny Tremain. He's living, apprenticing with Mr. Lapham, a silversmith, blacksmith. And basically Johnny Tremain is like a bad boy, like in my mind, a young John Mayer of the blacksmithing game, where he's like, I'm hot, I know it, I'm really good at blacksmithing, I'm the #1 apprentice in this shop, as Jackson Vanderpump Rules would say, like, I'm the #1 guy in this group. Like, that's him. He's like, yep. And basically the person who's the master blacksmith is very religious, makes him read a biblical passage at the midday meal in front of everyone, like commonplace quotes all about pride, including pride goeth before the fall. This is storytelling we might refer to as like subtle. Like you're like, oh God, like what's about to happen to this guy? And we also meet the women of the house, like the daughter-in-law of the master blacksmith and her 4 daughters, one of whom is like pre-engaged, you might say, to Johnny Tremain, who is like ostensibly going to take this shop over when Grandpa kicks it. And immediately you're like, something's going to happen to this guy. And something does. But then automatically we're already like, and here's another whole plot line. He's an orphan and he has a silver cup. And it's like, Allison, I'm going to, like, this breaks my brain. What was the point of that plot line?
So in much the same way that Maury Povich would present the results of a paternity test to an unsuspecting young gentleman, Johnny Tremain comes out the gate in like way too many situations and says, this cup, like, this is how you know. This is how you know my lineage.
This is me.
And here's my thing. Like, I still don't know. I read this book. I read summaries. I still don't understand what he was going for. In terms of Pride Cometh Before the Fall, he is working on a Sunday on a special project for John Hancock. Like, again, there's no subtlety in this book.
There's
Hancock
none.
Is like, you know me for my signature. Now I need
Big
the
names
cups.
or no names. That's her attitude.
And we learn that essentially the man from whom Johnny is supposed to be learning, from Johnny's perspective, isn't cutting the mustard anymore. He doesn't have the skill set. So Johnny is like, I'm taking this upon myself. And instead of kind of framing this as like a youthful folly, Johnny is so terribly punished for his supposed pride and for trying to get the job done. Something that kind of actually like broke my heart a little bit reading this book was thinking about the lesson that this injury is a punishment. And to your point about the kind of puritanical influences here, thinking about the fact that by this time this book comes out, there are already millions of people who've been injured by the war. And this book is not indirect. It's like he did something bad. He burned his hand. He deserves to be disfigured. He deserves to be disfigured. He deserves to like have no sense of purpose in his life. And he really, really struggles with figuring out what he's supposed to do next. Part of why I find this disappointing, and this isn't me like putting in a historical lens, there are authors in that time period and even in the wake of the Great War who try to reimagine different lives for people who've been disabled as a result of the war. Esther comes in and she's like, no, he's useless and he needs to feel really bad about himself. And that's heartbreaking considering how many people have read this book.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And again, it gets back to like, I wonder if she was sort of struggling with her shift. I mean, she'd written fiction before this. She won like the O. Henry Short Story Prize at some point before she even wrote that bio of Paul Revere. So I don't think it's like we can say like, well, she was new to the game. She made this choice basically to overinvest in the metaphor of the revolution being forged in a literal crucible. Like basically the way he's disabled is that he asks one of the other subpar apprentices to hand him a crucible to pour the liquid silver to make candles for this like sugar bowl that he's baking for John Hancock. And one of the apprentices decides to teach him a lesson about pride by giving him a crucible that he knows is cracked. So then the silver comes out and burns his hand and his thumb attaches to the rest of his hand and he's disabled.
It's Dove, like, right? Like the symbol of peace. It's a boy named Dove. And like all the descriptions remind us like he is a bigger person. And they're like, of course he's bad.
Of course he's bad.
Like, no, yes. Like there is this, like they're really like, I think it's hard to explain from like a first century perspective. Like it really is written as a kind of American Revolution parable. Like everything is so overwrought. It's like, it's Dove that compels him to go down this different path. Yep. The way that, Black people are talked about or ignored in the book. Her relationship generally with like female characters, mostly white female characters, is a bit different. But we have Mr. Light, right, who is sort of like his own like problematic. There's someone named Goblin. Like it is like a very weird, it reminded me a lot of kind of like Washington Irving or like that kind of overwrought early 19th century writing more so than like 1940s.
Yes. And I think that's a good point, because I was kind of imagining throughout this book, like, is Esther trying to do for Johnny Tremain what Longfellow did for Paul Revere? And like, where does she kind of go sideways on that? And like you're saying, everything is so like overdetermined and overwrought, where she's like, I'm leaning into this metaphor. I'm unproblematically repeating the slavery metaphor that founders themselves were using. And, you know, like, there's also something about the way that she creates the character of Johnny Tremain from the jump, where she's basically like, yeah, he was a bully. No, like, critical judgment of that. She was like, yes, he did bully people, but he was the best. And just this suggestion that people who are disabled, there's a moral failing attached to that. I also think something that's going on here that she has not thought about or calculated is that she is so determined to create a world in which merit determines everything, which I think she suggests the, like, you know, beauty of America, or like what defines our American experiment, as opposed to, say, the British Empire, that she doesn't think about everything inherent in that, which is you're shaming disabled people. There's the shaming of mental illness. I mentioned James Otis Jr. and the way that his mental illness is portrayed. And it's just like, it's wild to me that she was cool with that. It's so like heavy-handed.
And it's not really surprising. So like, a lot of people know Johnny Tremain because Walt Disney picked up the story afterwards. So it's kind of had like all these different lives. I was reading an essay about the book, and I thought that this line was like really interesting, because I think it also is something that we see with American Girl. Johnny Tremain, a figment of the writer Esther Forbes's imagination, has become real enough. And I think kind of what's interesting here is, I was talking to a few different people who work in Boston, and I said, have you read Johnny Tremain? What's your relationship to it? And people roughly our age hadn't been forced to read it in school, but they had experience after experience of people who had read it in an older kind of generation. And the note that this author was making, or the argument I should say, is that like, he kind of had this very particular life in the Cold War. Like, Esther was like, I'm going to teach you like why you shouldn't be a flapper in the 20s with witches. And then for like World War II, Cold War, it's like, we're going back. I kept thinking, like, in our generation, one of the most iconic pre-Hamilton representations of this period and these people was 1776, the musical. And thinking about Sit Down, John, as this really iconic moment about like the intensity of the diplomacy. And this really is like a very 1940s product, because it's like, it doesn't matter who you are, like, you need to learn how to stand up. And it's fascinating that this is such a book about masculinity, considering the author. Like, it really is a book about a very specific idea of what makes you a man and what doesn't make you a man. He's 14 also.
He's 14. And that, I feel like you kind of lose that as you're reading it, because you're like, wait a second, how old is this man? And I think you're right. That's something that kind of caught me off guard about the way that she describes the revolution itself and the lead up to a lot of these familiar events that people would know from popular culture and whatever, is there's a lot of talking about why, of course, we must be patriots, but there's really like no conversation. Like, there's many plot points where he's like, you got to call people to the secret meeting. Like, you got to tell them they owe you eight pounds and all this stuff. Like, that's the secret symbol. And then we all get there and it's like, okay, so where's like the big conversation about like, let's really get into these ideas. Like, why does this matter? Why would you support? You know, you get these descriptions of how organized the British Army is as they're starting to be a heavier presence in Boston, and how he, at some point towards the end of the book, is like, wait a second, we're supposed to fight these guys? And he's like, oh, like, I don't know how that's going to go. And it's like, okay, so we get how your fear is real of that, which it would be, of course. But why then would you be willing to take that on? What ideas are so important that you would be willing to take that on, and all of these peers of yours who are older than you and more established? And there's really like no conversation about that, which is amazing, because James Otis Jr. is famous in my mind because he argued the writs of assistance case in the 1760s. He lost, and basically the writs of assistance like gave the British the right to enter your home at any time, and like a bunch of what we would call like civil liberty violations. But it's really crucial to John Adams. It's so super crucial to other peers who then cite his work in writing the Declaration of Independence and thinking about the Constitution. And instead, he gets basically one line where they're like, oh, like Sam Adams is basically like, I'm tired. I want to go home. Like this guy just keeps like talking and we all know he's nuts. And then he's like, we should do this so that a man can stand up. And you're like, stand up to what? For what? Against whom? Like, it's just, it's weird to have someone who's known for their intellect, like basically devalued to the point of a slogan, which only makes sense if you were selling something or creating propaganda.
I think the reason why this book had a moment when it did, right, and that author I mentioned previously goes on to say that the book has never been out of print. It has sold many millions of copies. I found an article written during the bicentennial where this woman, like, there's an exclamation point on her review, and she's like, it's a bicentennial must. She's like, you need the cap, you need the outfit, you need the spinning wheel. What I like about this review, kind of like what it made me think about, is she's summarizing the book and she's like, the romance of childhood sweethearts, the pathos of a crippling injury, the violence of tar and feathering, the shock of a firing squad, the humor of a featherbed disguise, the delight of a silversmith's perfection. They're all there in this colonial epic. Esther Forbes' masterpiece contains all the inspiration of early American patriots. It's a must. What I think is happening here in part with like, there's these ideological and like incredibly violent land and air and sea wars happening in the 1940s and again in the 1970s, right? In the context of the Cold War. And there are people asking hard questions about what they're really fighting for. And we've internalized as a society this kind of myth that everyone was just thrilled to be fighting in World War II, and they weren't, right? Of course. Or they weren't allowed to fight for whatever reason. But I think part of what these reviewers, and they're kind of like tapping into this Esther Forbes moment, is they're saying like, don't worry about the why, right? You think of like the famous book, The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution. Esther's like, they're not there. It's about a hand. Matter. It's about silver. It's right. It doesn't matter. Like, don't ask questions. And I think there is something like from all this distance later, looking back, we can see all of these other layers. 1976, there are people asking really hard questions about why they're being forced to participate in violent land and air and sea wars. And this resurgence of Johnny Tremain is like, don't worry about it. I have this very vivid memory of like being in line for roller coasters, and people always say, look, that little kid is doing it. And maturing and saying to myself, but that doesn't mean I have to do it. I'm not comparing war to a roller coaster. What I think is happening is these authors who are boosters of Johnny Tremain are like, he did it. He's 14. He did it. Right. It's a very toxic kind of thing. I'm not comparing them, but I'm saying like, it's what it made me think of.
Well, no, I think that's a good point. And it kind of makes me think about a bigger question about like, what do people imagine history is for? Why would you ever learn history? Why would you teach it in schools? Why would you read it in your free time or listen to a podcast about doll culture born in the 1980s? You know, like, why are we doing this? And I think part of what's going on is she is, because of World War II, at the kickoff point of a resurgence of people whose firm answer is history is to teach patriotism, or history is to teach citizenship, which often is a watchword for them, for people who believe this, for patriotism. To me, citizenship is much more complicated than patriotism and includes questioning, you know, the government to which you've sworn allegiance. And I think, you know, people fighting in the revolution would agree with me on that. But a lot of that gets lost in these conversations that you're pointing us to of patriotism, where it's like, my country, right or wrong? Like, yes or no? Are you going to enlist in World War II? Like, do you want to be the person who says, like, I'm a conscientious objector? Or can I get some more information, please? Like, Esther has no time for that, and neither does this book. Like, there is no one here. There's a famous statistic. I have no idea if it's true. I don't think anyone's been able to verify this, that John Adams said a third of colonists were for the revolution, a third were loyalists, and a third were, you know, in between or undecided. And I often think about that because it's like, what would this book be like if it was written from the perspective of someone who is truly undecided? Like, initially when we meet Johnny Tremain, he's like, not really a politics guy. Like, I'm, you know, the #1 blacksmith apprentice, don't have time to read newspapers. We are told that his mother taught him to read and write, which is, you know, not, which is unique for his station and his role in life. But it's not like he's reading newspapers or keeping up. So when he interns in the newspaper office after he's disabled, he's like, wow, learning a lot here. And he's like, surprised I'm coming down on the Patriot side because that's the newspaper's view where I'm, basically a messenger boy. But, it's like, what happens if he had stayed the whole book and was like, yeah, you know what? I don't know. This seems complicated to me. I'm not sure.
I think there's also a really sad interpretation of the book, which is if you have, a very different life as a teenager or you're going through high school, right? You think of people who had a scene moment, right? Or they decided to be prepsters, or you can think of Mean Girls, right? As sort of an encapsulation of early millennial culture. His version of that is becoming a soldier. Mm-hmm. Like he is essentially caught up in a scene and a moment. And I'm not making light of it at all. I read this book as looking at a person who is the same age as my eldest nephew and reading Johnny as a boy who's lost and figuring things out and really doesn't know what his values are. And really, when you think about it, the person he's apprenticing with ridicules him, right? Johnny essentially has what we would think of as self-esteem. And the person who's supposed to be training him says, no, you don't. And he suffers this very traumatic injury. And because he's broken some societal rules under this pressure, he's further punished by not really getting medical care that's appropriate to his hand. Or there's different things we could talk about with that. But the fact that he's basically cast out, he's lost, and he thought he was on this path to some stability. It's sort of the equivalent of being a homeless 10th grader and really having no clue what you're going to do with your life. And I think what's really sad is thinking about this being in the hands of a 10th or 11th grader in the 1960s, right? And that recruiter is coming to your high school and there's a war in Vietnam and you're not really sure what they're fighting for, but this book is being taught to you as the model of what it means to be a man. And to be a man is to stand up and to go to meetings, even if you don't understand. It's a really kind of sad commentary, I think, on the way that in a lot of ways, like young men don't actually get respect in certain ways. This isn't turning into like a bro podcast, but I think there is like a very sad reading here of him being a boy who's lost and him encountering a lot of toxic ideas and people and him essentially having nowhere to go and like falling into literally ending the book with his high point being holding a gun.
Yeah, that's a bleak ending if you think about it that way. I think it's sort of like, to me, his character is represented as like a mirror. I mean, I know her previous book was Mirror for Witches, but to me, Johnny Tremain is himself a mirror in the way that a lot of impressionable people are when they're young and, even some when they're older. And in terms of like, he mirrors what he's presented with. So when he's with his mom, he knows that reading and writing is important and that being a blacksmith is important. And because that's what they've determined together would be a good future for him. And then when he's with the blacksmith, it's like, okay, I'm going to be the best blacksmith and my value comes from the thing that is reflected back at me. They're telling me I'm very good at this. That's where my pride's coming from. Then he's disabled and he's really out on his own. And it's like, he's cast off, as you're saying, he has no one reflecting back on him. And he's really lost. It's like, that's to me like the saddest part of this book. And when he decides, his mother had said to him, if ever you have no other options, that's when you take this DNA, family tree cup that proves that you're from this actually elite family, and you present it to this merchant who is a relative of mine, and he will know by this cup that you are related to him and he will help you. And then long story short, this guy is like, oh, I had one stolen from me, you stole it. And has him arrested. He's put on trial. And again, this plot line is like comes and goes real fast. Like we move right past it because we're back onto something else. But this man is literally like, I want him to be executed. And he's not because the girl who is, his pre-engagement, match, who no longer at this point risks a lot by coming and testifying that she had seen the cup before it was alleged to have been stolen in his possession at their house. But it's like, so at that point he's like, okay, so I have no family. Like the orphan plotline is helpful if you're trying to sell a story about why the American Revolution and meritocracy is preferable to empire. So I get that. But it's like, who is he reflecting? It's like, he's not reflecting any family culture, no support system. And then he has Raph, and like that becomes the person he reflects. Because he's like,
I
wow.
honestly, like,
He's
I can't,
But Raph immediately is like, you seem to bully people a lot, like, or you swear a lot, or you're always putting people down. Like, why do you think you do that? And he basically is like, like Raph doesn't like that, so I'm going to stop doing that. But it's like that then becomes who he becomes as a person. And really, to me, the love story in this book is Raph and Johnny Tremain.
yes, because the most intimate moments happen towards the very end when they are in a tavern in the wake of the events of April, right? So we have kind of like the events, right, that are still celebrated today in the form of Patriots Day in Massachusetts. We have these battles and we see him dying. And it's interesting because the reference point that came to my mind was actually MASH. And I was thinking about like representations of male friendship on that show. And that's actually what it made me think of the most, was the kind of tightness that they have, the way that they communicate, and the fact that the last kind of grand act that's going to happen between them is the passing of the gun, right? Which still works, but needs some repair, right? Yet another kind of metaphor. And the fact that he then gets in touch with a doctor who says, like, I can fix you. I can fix this injury that you have. But the fact that like the central character is basically a broken boy and what kind of role he'll play in the American Revolution, I just want to compare him for a moment to Ben Davidson.
Okay, I'm listening.
No, because I got thinking about like representations of apprentices. And I think something that the Felicity books did well, sometimes to the point of folly, but it put ideas and thoughts in young Ben's head, and then out his mouth came different ideas, right? Like different ideologies about the revolution, even though it kind of like gave him a bigger place than he would have really had. I think something this book actually does well in terms of representing reality, like the second that this boy really isn't useful and he's causing trouble, he's kicked out. Like the apprenticeship is not really this like beautiful, caring relationship. It's a transactional paternalism. And when it's over, it's over. Like, yeah, in the same way that if Ben were to be injured, or let's say something were to disable Ben in some other way, it doesn't matter how much he and Felicity like the same horse. Ben is out. He's not part of the family.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways that's maybe for the best. But I did find the relationships in this book really confusing. Like, I tried to take note of what I thought to be love triangles in this book. And I think you could say there's one between Lavinia, Johnny, and Scylla. Like, Lavinia is the daughter of the merchant that he's related to. So in a way, like, that's with his aunt or something, cousin.
Yeah, that's a weird scene.
So that's but he is like, it's weird because at that point in the book, he knows and we know that he's likely related to her. And yet he's like, oh my God, like, she's so beautiful. Like, even in front of Scylla, who he definitely is like crushing on, he's like, whew, he's like, sorry, I couldn't listen to what you were saying. Like, I was just, Lavinia's here. She's so beautiful. Like, it's weird.
Esther, Paul Revere, and Johnny, I think, are the real triangle.
Yeah.
I'm being completely serious. Like, I think she knew that she couldn't make fiction about Paul. So she was like, all right, I got to knock off a few years. Maybe he can be blonde, maybe not. She's not really that picky about it. And she's kind of like, all right, so where am I going to go with this? All right, there needs to be an event that means he can't be a silversmith. There has to be this thing that crystallizes him or moves him in a different direction. I also see this book as a reminder of, like, you can only do what you can do until you get more information. Like, generations of people read this book and would have left with the conclusion that a Pulitzer Prize winner is telling them that Black people in the city of Boston had no real role in the revolution. I think that is something you can easily deduce from this book, and that Indigenous people only exist in the form of caricature or as a costume to be put on by people like Johnny Tremain. So this is not to say that to justify any behavior, but to say this is a book that was held up as the gold standard on pretty much every level by an author, held up as the top standard in the field. There are so many ways now that you see people who are still kind of bucking against any new information.
Johnny is, of course, present at all the significant events in this moment at the Revolution, as all great authors do. You put your character right there. and he's part of the Boston Tea Party. He's witnessing the Boston Massacre. He's like following Lexington and Concord and all of this. And he's part of the secret society. He's like serving them punch, kind of like facilitating. So he gets to hear a lot of stuff and witness stuff. And we never see a person of color, as you're saying, be involved, as we know they were. And we also never see, as you're saying, like any reference to indigenous people, and frankly of women. I mean, at one point, Lavinia's like maid, Miss Bessie, is like, hey, if there was like a women of Daughters of Liberty, like I would be that. Like Sam Adams and I are tight. And he's kind of like, ho hum, like next. And it's like, I'm sorry, what? Not to get like remember the ladies, but like, can we?
But in the framing of this story, war is a crisis for men. That is what it is. Like, war is a crisis for men. And we have right before the kind of crystallizing events that really launch like what we think of as the American Revolution, we hear about what's happening in Lexington on the village green. The war had begun. It was the dawn of the 19th of April, but Johnny Tremain still slept. And I'm flagging this passage, which is from page 254. Second of all, would not have picked this book if I knew it was this long. Third of all, there's these really weird early reviews where they're like, Esther wanted war too badly. Like, she's trying to comfort isolationists. Like, she just wanted it too much. I do think it's like, there's something fascinating about having your protagonist basically being like hitting snooze as war is starting. I feel like Esther wrote that page when she overheard someone talking badly about FDR.
Yes. And I also think like you could read that into the depiction of disability in this book, which is both like naive and jingoistic, of like in the sense of he's disabled, and there's a couple moments in the book where everyone's like, yeah, like when we go off and fight, it's going to be crazy. And then he's like, and like, we're all going to Lexington, like we're out of here. And then he's like, can I come? And they're like, well, we didn't mean you. Or like, well, we need someone brave to share messages and run around. Like, obviously not you, Johnny Tremain. And the end result of this book is the suggestion that all you need is to fix your disability, and then you too can fight for your country. Like, you've been holding yourself back, because Dr. Warren says to him, like a third of the way through the book, when he's a messenger boy, hey, like basically, did God disable you, or did you have an accident? And he panics and says, like, basically, I was born with this disability. And then later he's like, I lied. I wasn't born disabled. And he's like, oh, well, you just have scar tissue, and I just need to find some men to hold you down, and I'll operate on you, and then you can fire a rifle. And he's like, sounds good to me. And like, literally, that's the end of the book. We don't even go with him through the operation.
He also refuses pain. He refuses pain medication. He's like, not me, not today. He's like, I'm not going to feel a thing. And it's like the metaphors are not subtle here. I don't think there's anything particularly noteworthy. Like, he could bite through his own tongue. He's like, I don't care.
Yes. It reminded me weirdly, even though it's not related to, remember after 9/11 when Mark Wahlberg was like, if I'd been on one of the planes, it would have gone differently. And everyone was like, you are a sociopath. Like, how dare you say this about this horrible tragedy that killed so many people? And he was like, yeah. But like his desire to be masculine was so strong that he said it without thinking. And I believe he totally meant it. But this lean in towards, in times of national crisis, of like, I have to perform masculinity right now, is so strong in Marky Mark and in Johnny Tremain, that you're at the expense of so many people. Because in that scene as well, as we noted before off air, Dr. Warren is like, well, who cared for you when you hurt your hand? And he's like, a midwife. And he's like, bah, like they just threw some herbs at you. Like, of course, that's it. Like, that's what happened to you. That's the real tragedy. You let women take care of you.
So my new favorite genre of TikTok, this does relate, I swear. My new favorite genre of TikTok is women who use the filter that gives you like a beard, and they put their hair up in a cap, and then they pretend to be a co-host of like a male podcast. So one of my new favorite TikTokers to watch, ironically, is this show called Good Bro, Bad Bro. And they basically just say things that could be like platitudes, like thrown out into the trash. But they say it with such complete seriousness. I thought it was satire, but it's actually not. But women have taken this on as a kind of like genre to perform. And they'll say things such as, you know, the thing about females, or like the way that like a man has value. I feel like we could run a quiz that would be impossible, which would be line from Johnny Tremain or line from a toxic podcast of God. Like Joe Rogan, and like you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Joe Rogan or Johnny Tremain. I read this on my Kindle, and I'm looking at my highlights, and a lot of them are just like, you know, basically describe like reacting in the same way that you're describing, minus like the cool points of TikTok. Like, at one point, he describes women on the street as dirty sluts. And at first I was like, I'm sorry, is this a book for children? And secondly, I was like, Johnny, like what? And it's sort of like, again, where she can't decide what kind of book this is. We're supposed to, I guess, see this as a redemption arc of like, he's punished with disability and then he's redeemed by like Dr. Warren is going to heal him, but we're not going to get to see that. He's like an orphan who believes he comes from not elite ancestry, but then he's rewarded by finding out he actually is related to this elite group, and it's hinted he can make an appeal for some property after the revolution. But then when that's not happening. That check's not going to clear, Johnny, sorry. And when he finally gets the proof we've all been looking for, if you believe this book is about proving his paternity or his ancestry, he gets the piece of the Bible after the family is thread that's like, aha, these are my real parents. I am related to this family. And he literally tears it. He's like, I must keep this for later. It will be important for me as evidence. And then literally 10 minutes later, he's like, I tore it up and threw it in the fire. And it's like, I could see Joe Rogan doing that. Where I'm like, why did we even have this scene? What book is this? At one point, he says simply, quote, on page 29, we're all poor worms. And I was like, I don't know what I'm in for. I don't know what this book is. I feel like Esther said to Paul Revere psychically, if I told you I loved your revolution, would you hold it against me, Britney Spears style? And he was like, forever, girl, forever.
I kept thinking about Meghan Trainor, all about that bass. Esther's like, I'm all about the silversmith. Like, don't ask. She's like, I'm all about the treble and the silversmith. So there's a scene where he goes into Copp's Hill graveyard. And I do think like as a plus mark of this book, which I don't recommend you read to children, but as a plus mark, she does know how to paint a picture of colonial Boston and has that command of what that looked like. So he's kind of freaking out. My friends don't want me to touch them with my hand. That's very sad. Seemingly neither the moon nor the stars above nor the dead about him cared. He lay face down, sobbing and saying over and over that God had turned away. His frenzied weeping had given him some release. He must have slept. And this is something that I think like you don't read in fiction anymore. Like we get this really weird interiority at times, and then at other times he could be literally anyone.
Yes. It's very strange where he also like, I think what's interesting too is I wonder how many books today take as a given that the character is religious and present God as a character in the book who can move things, make moves, make things happen, or just be appealed to. Like, I think in some weird way, books set in the past now are also historically like non-religious in some ways, so as to kind of like fit into our more secular world, like for better or worse. But one of the things he does, like there's that scene, which I noted as well. And then there's that scene where he's flirting with Scylla, sort of. And she's like, well, you know, Pumpkin isn't a good last name, but like Scylla Tremain would be a good last name. And you're like, what is happening? It's like very middle school. Then she gives him a green apple. And he goes back to the attic he shares with Rab. And he's like, I'm going to put this on the windowsill. And if it turns into something better, that's a sign that I'm supposed to be with Scylla. And you're like, what's going on? He's like, that's a sign that God wants me to be with Scylla. And then he says, on page 174, he's like, God, like, if you want me to be with Scylla, like, you'll turn this apple into something more beautiful. And then basically Rab eats the apple and he's like, oh, there was a worm in it. And then at that point we get his interiority and he says he had been a fool to think of the apple as a symbol of himself and Scylla. And it's like, but what does it mean that the apple then was eaten by this guy, that you also have a very close relationship with. Like, it was sort of like that song in Rent that's like Light My Candle or whatever that is. It's like I'm just like I can't make heads or tails of what's going on here. And when Rab leaves to go to the militia, he's like, Rab, like he won't say goodbye to him. It's like the weirdest scene where he's like, Rab, like I'm not gonna say goodbye to you, and then he runs after him in the street and he's like, I wish I said goodbye. It's okay, so
serious question. What blonde or dirty blonde himbo would you cast as Johnny Tremain today?
From like any, does it have to be someone who's like 14 right now? Because I'm not hep on like 14-year-old blonde actors. I think I would cast Chad Michael Murray from his period, from when he was on like Gilmore Girls, like very young, or just like first on One Tree Hill. Because I think what you need in this role is someone who you're like, you know, back to my grandmother's like view of actors, like no one's that great an actor. Like I need someone where I'm like, I know that you've done wrong. Like I know what you did to Sophia Bush. I'm casting you in this role. Who is your dream cast for Johnny Tremain?
So as a joke, do you know who Axel is on TikTok?
No.
He is a young man who moved to New York City, and the New York Times did a piece about him because people think that he's living in literally one of the smallest apartments in New York City as a performance piece. And he recently applied to and was rejected from Juilliard. So I think a grifter would be pretty good in this role.
I'm looking him up.
I actually think someone like Nick Kroll would make this bearable for me. I know that's kind of a weird choice, but I feel like someone
as Johnny Tremain
with like really weird highlights would make this palatable for me.
Oh my God,
I don't even want to cast out the rest of the book because it's bad.
It's really bad. I mean, I would cast Nick Jonas as Raph because I think he would bring like a nice element to it. Maybe Ryan Reynolds. I don't know. The Johnny Tremain piece, it's like you need someone who's like kind of a jackass, like who's like, yeah, I know I'm hot, whatever. And, you know, just judgmental. I don't know. I really think Chad Michael Murray is my dream cast. I don't have any strong feelings about other characters in this book at this time, but I really want to know, like, who would you cast as Paul Revere? And knowing this came out during the golden age of Hollywood, who do you think Esther would want cast as Paul Revere?
I think anyone who will have her. No, I don't know. I actually don't know her that way. That's a really good question because I think there are celebrities, like I think Mark Livingston actually kind of looks a bit.
Yeah.
I would love if the Duplass brothers took this on.
I was going to say Mark Duplass. He would be my pick for today. I think if I was casting on behalf of Esther, and Esther, if you're with us, you know, during this recording, feel free to make your views known, and thank you. I think Esther would cast Gene Kelly because he was I think physically there's like some resemblance, but also his whole like shtick was like, I'm the everyman. Like I dance in jeans as opposed to like Fred Astaire dancing in a tuxedo. So I think that would be interesting casting, but I do think the Duplass brothers would take this to an interesting place.
Yeah, I don't know what female actresses or actors I would put up for the roles necessarily, unless they could completely transform them. We would need another 2 hours to talk about like what the culture has done to Cynthia Nixon. There's no time.
I need to go watch Gilded Age because you've seen episode 1, and I've been like sort of saving it, but I'm afraid to. I saw the Christine Baranski feature on Sunday morning, and I love her, and I love this for her, and I'm very happy for her. But I'm scared, and I like Cynthia Nixon. Like, why do we punish? No woman is going to run for political office if this is the punishment they get. I'm sorry, like. The things that have happened on And Just Like That with Cynthia, with Miranda, it's like, I don't have language. We don't have language for that.
I think Che has made us all ask difficult questions, right? Like I think Che.
What are the questions? What do you think are the questions?
I don't know what these actors did to the writer's room to get this material.
I think like Sada Ramirez, who plays Che, I'm a longtime fan of them, and I'm very upset about on the one hand, it's like they are being depicted as hot.
I know.
On the other hand, their humor is not funny. And
No.
I'm like, what's in this? And there's plenty of TikTok saying this is not an original take. What is in this for Che? Let's all think about that.
Right.
I'm sorry. Like, it's psycho.
Someone made a meme and it said the 4 scariest words in the English language, and it was, "I am Che Diaz." I think it's just like a very disappointing and sloppy arc for both of those actors to kind of have to muddle through. And in Gilded Age, Cynthia Nixon's character is sort of this like bizarre Pollyanna who is like very wealthy, but also kind of a little bit rudderless. I agree. Like, I hope this doesn't ever happen to Elizabeth Warren, or I don't know, like, what if Nancy Pelosi has to be in a star off, like, or a spinoff with April Kepner? I don't know.
Wow.
Right? Like,
well, I think it's just like, it's just disappointing because it's like, there's no sex in this show. And I know it's not called Sex in the City. It's a show that doesn't really know what it wants to be. And I think on the one hand, they were like, hey, we get it. There were no people of color or queerness in the original. So we will be adding that in. But instead, in a show that centered fashion, they've made all of those people accessories to the original white characters. And so I kind of have to ask again, like, what's in this for Che and like anyone else who's added to the cast? Because in my mind, I'm like, Che Diaz would never want to be friends with any of these people.
no. And the fact that Carrie is on a podcast, I thought was going to be kind of an interesting device for her to have the reflective voiceovers that are kind of what's at the heart of the show, right? Like these moments where she reflects on something bigger. That hasn't happened. I guess, like, to use their language, like, I can't help but wonder, is this what Johnny Tremain fought for?
Yes, it is. I mean,
like, did he stand up for Che's stand up? Like, is that what we're supposed to?
That was a tough scene. I'm a couple episodes behind, but that scene of the filming of the Netflix special was difficult. Like, I just felt for Sada Ramirez filming that, where I'm like, I'm sure they don't find this funny. Or even, like, who is their podcast for? Like, who are the imagined listeners of that show where they have a literal woke moment button that they push? It's like, I'm just, it's so cringe. Like, I don't even know what to say.
In a world where this book and this author has a Pulitzer and the top award for children's literature, I have a lot of questions for myself and where I'm headed. So
Fair.
You know, it's made me rethink a lot of things. So,
well, I mean, I guess I was just disturbed because I went on YouTube and looked to see if that movie Johnny Tremain was on there. And there's only a few scenes on there, and one of them is them returning. Basically, they present the Tea Party as this really cool public party hangout where when the men are done, still dressed in indigenous clothing or sort of like affect, they literally parade down the street arm in arm, and then they put a comical amount of lanterns in a single tree, and they sing a song about the Tree of Liberty. And it's like, YOLO, like, we're doing this, like, we're Sons of Liberty, we're singing a song, like, it's all been, you know, arranged. And there's a part of me that's like, so I'm reading the comments on YouTube on that video, which is always a mistake. And someone was like, this is from a time when they taught real history in history class. And it's like, like, founder chic is still with us. And obviously, like, people have known that since Hamilton came out and everything with that. But it's a lot. Like, I'm just like, have we moved on from this or not? And allegedly, this is like still the 15th highest selling children's book.
It has never been out of print, as I said, and it really is like still considered one of the most successful of all time. Part of where this moved up on my internal list of suggestions people give us is in the course of doing Caroline, I was trying to read lists of top books about war written for children, and this is always on there as like top selling as well as like top ranked.
Man.
So that's kind of how it went up for me. I think what's fascinating is like we have a lot of myths and frankly lies about the 1940s, 1950s. This is a war that's about taxation and empire. And what's actually happening in that period is you have the most taxed wealthy generation of all time. And they're like, yeah, but like he doesn't get caught up in that and neither should you.
Exactly. And it's so weird because somebody else was writing about this book and they were like, Esther was ahead of her time because she understood the power of free speech. Like, he works at a newspaper and like this, and they emphasize the fact that none of the newspapers were shut down until actually like the colonists fired on the British. And it's like, I don't really see this as a book that's celebrating the right of free speech. And actually, I think she predicted the culture of the 50s in which this book would be quite comfortable, both for Disney to promote and for people to teach in classrooms about, like patriotism, right or wrong. Like, we read The Witch of Blackbird Pond, and I'm not just standing that book because I'm from that town, I swear. But to me, like, that book asks really important questions about freedom of speech, if that's what you're actually thinking about in that period. So it's interesting to, like, I know they're depicting different time periods, but to have those from roughly produced in the same era next to each other, I think they look very different to me, and they're doing very different things. So it's interesting. I don't know. It's a weird time in children's books, and maybe we'll be reading more from that period. Who knows?
Not next month, because next book we are reading the 1997 memoir of Michelle Kwan.
Ambassador Kwan.
Ambassador Kwan, yes.
Ambassador Kwan.
We're catapulting to a completely different period to read her autobiography. She's written many books, but we are reading the 1997. And that book is very tiny. So if you like to read along, it's relatively easy to get, and it is tiny. Not the investment that Johnny Tremain was and is.
Also, the Winter Olympics are almost upon us, which is inconceivable to me. So they're beginning on February 3rd. So for all of us here on Patreon, if you've not joined the Discord, please do so, and write to us if you don't know how, because we can give you instructions. And Allison has posted instructions on the feed, so go look for those. But we have an Olympics thread, and I'm sure we'll be doing some live watch-alongs or conversations about the Olympics and Ambassador Kwan of it all. And Tara Lipinski, like, I don't want this to tear us apart, Allison, but you are Team Tara, and I am a lifelong Ambassador Kwan. Not apologist. She needs no apology. I'm a stan. I'm an advocate. I'm a storyteller. I'm an influencer. I'm an Ambassador Kwan influencer. So Tara, of course, will be doing commentary during the Olympics. So I feel like there's something to be done there where we, go along for that ride. I proposed a bingo sheet I would make for the figure skating competition based on tropey things that they say. So maybe I will be producing that. Only time will tell. Stay tuned.
If people want to show you videos of like their dolls doing a triple axel, how should they do that?
If you want to do that, or, more in my wheelhouse, get deep with me about 90s figure skating and early 2000s figure skating and where you're at in all of this, please contact me on Instagram at Mimi Mahoney, or on Twitter at Mary Mahoney123. And I've only just learned that my DMs on Twitter were closed. So I think I've adjusted that. So if you've left me a message there, I truly didn't see it till now. So I'm working on that. But yes, would love to have that conversation. And Allison, if people would love to get at you about your dream casting for Johnny Tremain, your thoughts on Tara Lipinski, how might they get in touch?
I'm at Allison Harks on Twitter and Instagram, and you should definitely follow the show. You can find everything on our website, including our phone number. You can also reach out to us via snail mail if that's something that you would like to do. But we're American Girls Podcast. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and we're also at A Girls Pod on Twitter, but we're pretty easy to find.
Excellent. All right. So we're looking forward to next month and watching the Olympics and all kinds of things. And thank you all for being part of this community. We love hanging out with you, and we will see you on the next episode.